The morning fog still clung to the pasture when Jackson Hayes stepped onto his porch, steam rising from his mug of black coffee. His weathered boots creaked against the wooden planks as he surveyed his land. 50 acres of Montana wilderness that had been in his family for 3 generations. He wasn't expecting visitors, especially not at dawn. But there, beside his old oak tree, stood a woman, barefoot, clutching a baby blanket. And beside her, oddly enough, was a goat with one bent horn. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Jackson took a slow sip of his coffee, watching as the woman nervously shifted her weight from one dirty foot to the other. The goat seemed unbothered, casually munching on the tall grass at the edge of his property. The rising sun caught on something metallic around the woman's neck, a simple chain disappearing beneath her threadbare sweater. He set his mug down on the porch railing and descended the 3 wooden steps. The woman didn't run, but her body tensed, like a deer ready to bolt at the first sign of danger. The goat, a scruffy thing with patchy brown and white fur, moved protectively closer to her side. "Morning," Jackson said, keeping his distance. He gestured toward the animal. "That your goat, or just a traveling companion?" The woman clutched the baby blanket tighter, a small blue thing with stars embroidered in one corner. Her hair was a mess of dark curls, and her eyes, deep brown and wary, sized him up carefully. "His name is Barley," she said, her voice stronger than her appearance suggested. "And we're sorry to trespass. We thought this was public land." Jackson crossed his arms. Nothing's public out here except the sky. He glanced at the blanket. "You got a baby somewhere I should know about?" She shook her head. "No, just memories." The goat, Barley, bleated once and head-butted her leg gently. Jackson noticed how thin her ankles were, how the dirt on her feet seemed ingrained rather than recent. "You always travel without shoes?" he asked. "Only when I have to leave in a hurry," she answered, surprising him with her candor. Jackson studied her for a long moment. She couldn't be older than 30, but something in her eyes spoke of more years than that. The kind of years that weigh heavy, that age you from the inside out. The baby blanket in her hands looked worn but clean, like something precious. "Name's Jackson Hayes," he said finally. "This is Whispering Pines Ranch." "Clara," she offered. "Just the one name, no more." "And you've met Barley." The goat looked up at the sound of his name, chewing thoughtfully on a mouthful of grass. One of his horns bent at an odd angle, giving him a perpetually confused appearance. "Well, Clara," Jackson said, uncrossing his arms, "you picked an interesting spot to wander through barefoot with a goat." She glanced behind her as if checking the empty road. "We won't trouble you. We can move on." Jackson looked at her feet again, then at the goat, then at the baby blanket clutched in her hands like a lifeline. Something in him, the part his late father had always said would be his downfall, softened. "You hungry?" he asked. Clara blinked, clearly not expecting this response. We can find something later," wasn't my question. A small smile flickered across her face. "Yes, we're hungry." Jackson nodded toward the house. "Come on then. Goat can stay on the porch." "Barley goes where I go," she said, that same unexpected firmness in her voice. Jackson raised an eyebrow. "Goat hair don't belong in breakfast eggs." "Then I'll eat on the porch with him." He studied her again, the stubborn set of her jaw, the protectiveness in her stance. Jackson sighed and shook his head. "Fine, but if he eats my mail, he's dinner." Clara actually smiled then, a quick, genuine thing that transformed her face. "He prefers grass to paper, don't you, Barley?" The goat bleated again, as if in agreement. Jackson led them to the house, an old 2-story farmhouse with white clapboard siding and blue shutters that needed repainting. He noticed how Clara hesitated at the steps, how she scanned the surroundings, not in appreciation, but in assessment.
Like someone cataloging exits. In the kitchen, Jackson cracked eggs into a cast-iron skillet while Clara sat awkwardly at the table, the baby blanket still clutched in one hand. Barley stood beside her chair, watchful and oddly dignified for a scraggly goat with a crooked horn. "You always travel with livestock?" Jackson asked, sliding bacon into the pan. "Barley found me," she said, stroking the goat's head absently. "On the road outside of Clearwater. Someone had abandoned him. He just started following me." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "And you let him?" Clara looked down at the goat, something soft in her expression. "Sometimes the ones nobody wants understand you better than anyone." Jackson said nothing to that, just turned the bacon and watched the fat sizzle. He'd lived alone since his father passed 3 years ago, and the sound of another voice in his kitchen felt foreign. Not unwelcome, just strange. "The blanket," he said after a while. "Is it yours?" Clara's fingers tightened around the blue fabric. "It was my son's." The past tense hung in the air between them. Jackson didn't ask the obvious question. Instead, he slid eggs and bacon onto 2 plates and set one before her. "Eat," he said simply. Clara did, with the careful deliberation of someone who'd known hunger. Jackson pretended not to notice how she slipped small pieces of bacon to Barley, who accepted them with surprising gentleness. "Thank you," she said when the plate was empty. "We should go now." "Where to?" Jackson asked. She hesitated. "North, maybe. Or east. Somewhere new." "Sounds like nowhere specific." Clara shrugged. "Specifics haven't worked out well for me." Jackson leaned back in his chair. "Ranch needs help. Fence on the north pasture needs mending. Barn roof's got a leak." Clara stared at him. "Are you offering me work?" "Offering both of you work," he corrected, nodding toward Barley. "Goats are good for clearing brush, and you look like you need somewhere to be for a while." "You don't know me," she said, wariness creeping back into her voice. "Don't need to. I know work needs doing, and you need a place to stay." He gestured to her feet. "Can't go wandering barefoot forever." Clara looked down at Barley, who was staring up at Jackson with those strange rectangular pupils. "What's the catch?" "No catch. Work for room and board." Jackson paused, then added, "Stay, if he chooses this life." "If who chooses?" Clara asked, confused. Jackson nodded toward the goat. "Him. Animals know things we don't. If he settles here, means it's safe for both of you. If he gets restless, maybe you should keep moving." Clara's expression was skeptical. "You're letting a goat decide my fate?" "I'm letting life decide," Jackson corrected. "Sometimes we're too close to see what's good for us. Sometimes we need something else to show us the way." Clara looked down at Barley, who had settled comfortably by her feet, eyes half closed in contentment. "And if he chooses to stay?" "Then so can you, for as long as you need." That afternoon, Jackson showed Clara to the small cabin behind the main house. It had once been the foreman's quarters, back when Whispering Pines had enough cattle to need extra hands. Now it was mostly storage, but it had a bed and a small bathroom with running water. "It ain't much," Jackson said, pushing open the door, "but it's private." Clara stepped inside, Barley following dutifully behind. The cabin smelled of dust and disuse, but the window let in streams of golden light that made the space feel almost welcoming. A simple bed sat against one wall, a small table with 2 chairs near the kitchenette, and a faded rug covered part of the wooden floor. "This is more than enough," she said quietly. Jackson cleared his throat. "Sheets are in the closet. Pump by the barn if you want to wash up." Clara nodded, setting the baby blanket down on the bed, the first time she'd let go of it since arriving. Jackson noticed but didn't comment. "We start work at dawn," he said, moving toward the door. "Don't need your life story. Just need your hands willing to work." "Thank you," Clara said, her voice thick with something unnamed. Jackson tipped his hat and left her there, standing in the middle of the small cabin with Barley at her side, both of them looking like they weren't sure if this was real. That night, after a simple dinner of stew and cornbread, eaten mostly in silence, Jackson sat on his porch watching the stars emerge. He heard the cabin door open and watched as Clara stepped out, now wearing a pair of his old boots, far too big for her but better than nothing. She had washed her face and hands, and her dark hair hung damp around her shoulders. She walked to the small pen he'd constructed for Barley, where the goat was contentedly munching on fresh hay. Clara leaned against the fence, whispering something to the animal that Jackson couldn't hear. He thought about the baby blanket. About the way she'd said "my sons" in that past tense that left no room for questions. About the wariness in her eyes that spoke of running, of looking over her shoulder, of expecting the worst. Jackson wasn't a man who involved himself in other people's troubles. His father had raised him to mind his own business, to work hard, and to live simply. But something about Clara and her one-horned goat tugged at a place in him he'd thought long closed off. The next morning, Clara was already outside when Jackson stepped onto the porch with his coffee. She stood near the garden, boots still comically large on her feet, watching the sunrise paint the mountains pink and gold. Barley grazed nearby, seemingly at home. "You're up early," Jackson commented, descending the steps. Clara turned. In the soft morning light, with her hair loose and her face clean, she looked younger, less haunted. "I don't sleep much," she said simply. "Nightmares?" he asked before he could stop himself. She gave him a sharp look. "Memories." "Not the same thing." Jackson nodded, respecting the boundary. "Well, since we're both up, might as well start on that fence." They worked, side by side through the morning, Clara learning quickly how to mend the broken rails and tighten loose wire. Her hands were soft at first, not the hands of someone used to ranch work, but she never complained, even when blisters formed and then broke. Barley followed them, sometimes wandering off to investigate interesting patches of grass or weeds, but always returning to Clara's side, as if checking that she was still there, still safe. By midday, they'd repaired half the north fence. Jackson watched as Clara wiped sweat from her brow, her movements efficient now, no wasted energy. She was stronger than she looked. "You're a quick learner," he said, offering her his canteen. She accepted it with a nod. "I've had to be." They ate lunch in the shade of an old cottonwood tree, sandwiches and apples from Jackson's small orchard. Barley settled beside Clara, his odd bent horn resting against her leg. "What happened to his horn?" Jackson asked, nodding toward the goat. Clara's hand went to the bent appendage, stroking it gently. "He was abused by his previous owner, tied too tightly to a post with a rope around his horns. This one broke and healed wrong." Jackson studied the goat with new understanding. "And he still trusts people?" "Not people," Clara corrected. "Me." "There's a difference." That evening, after a day of honest work that left them both physically tired but somehow lighter, Jackson sat on the porch steps, cleaning his tools. Clara emerged from her cabin, now wearing an old flannel shirt of his that she'd rolled up at the sleeves. She hesitated, then joined him on the steps, keeping a respectful distance. "The work suits you," Jackson said, oiling a pair of shears. Clara looked down at her bandaged hands. "It feels good. To build something instead of just surviving." They sat in companionable silence for a while, listening to the evening sounds of the ranch, crickets starting their night song, the distant lowing of cattle in the west pasture, Barley's occasional soft bleats from his pen. "What made you offer us shelter?" Clara asked suddenly. "You don't know us. We could be trouble." Jackson considered this. "My father would say I'm a fool," he admitted. "But my mother, she always took in strays, birds with broken wings, feral cats, once even a fox kit whose mother had been killed." He glanced at Clara. She'd say sometimes the world puts someone in your path for a reason. And what do you say? Jackson set down the shears. I say everyone deserves a second chance at something, even if it's just a chance to rest before moving on. Clara's eyes shimmered in the fading light. What if there are people who might come looking for me? Jackson's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Are they the reason you're running barefoot, with nothing but a goat and a baby blanket? She nodded. A single, tight movement. Then they'd best hope they don't find you here, he said, his voice calm but something dangerous lurking beneath the words. Clara looked at him then, really looked at him, as if seeing him clearly for the first time. You're not what I expected, Jackson Hayes. What did you expect? Someone who'd ask more questions. He shrugged. Questions come with answers. Some answers aren't mine to hear until you're ready to tell them. That night, Clara dreamed of her son for the first time in months. Not the nightmare that usually haunted her, of screaming and blood and helplessness, but of him laughing, chasing butterflies in a field of wildflowers. She woke with tears on her face, but a strange lightness in her chest. Outside her window, Barley slept peacefully in his pen, his crooked horns silhouetted against the moonlight. And for the first time in a very long time, Clara didn't immediately check the locks or scan the darkness for threats. Instead, she laid back down and watched the stars through the small window until sleep reclaimed her. Days turned into a week, and Clara fell into the rhythm of ranch life with surprising ease. She learned to mend fences, repair shingles, tend the small vegetable garden, and even help with the few cattle Jackson kept on the western pasture. Barley, too, seemed to thrive. He cleared brush along the fence lines with enthusiastic efficiency, bleated greetings to Jackson each morning, and even made friends with the barn cats who initially viewed him with suspicious disdain. One afternoon, while Clara was hanging laundry on the line behind the main house, Jackson approached with a small box in his hands. Found these in the attic, he said, holding it out to her. Belonged to my sister before she moved to Denver. Thought they might fit you better than my boots. Inside were women's work boots, sturdy and only slightly worn, and several pairs of thick socks. Clara looked up at him, momentarily speechless. Thank you, she said finally, her voice catching. Jackson nodded once, already turning away. Can't have you tripping over my size 12s forever. Bad for productivity. Clara smiled at his retreating back, recognizing the gruff kindness for what it was. That evening, they sat on the porch together again, this time sharing a pitcher of lemonade Clara had made from lemons in the garden and honey from Jackson's small apiary. Barley lay at Clara's feet, content and drowsy in the warm evening air. He's choosing to stay, Jackson observed, nodding toward the goat. Never seen an animal settle in so quick. Clara followed his gaze. He knows when something feels right. And you? Jackson asked. What does this feel like to you? She considered this, swirling the lemonade in her glass. Like borrowing someone else's life for a while. Like pretending. What would make it real? Clara sighed. I don't know if it can be real. Not until I stop looking over my shoulder. Jackson set his glass down. Want to tell me what you're running from yet? She hesitated, then shook her head. Not yet. But soon, maybe. He accepted this with a nod. Whenever you're ready, or never, if that's what you need. Clara looked at him then, this quiet, steady man who had taken in 2 strays without demanding their stories or their gratitude. Why are you alone out here, Jackson? A man like you could have a family, a life full of people. Something flickered across his face, an old pain, carefully contained. Had a fiancée once, Sarah. She didn't take to ranch life like she thought she would. Too isolated, too much work, too little reward. He shrugged. She left for Seattle 8 years ago, married a dentist. I'm sorry. Don't be, she was right. This life isn't for everyone. He glanced at Clara. It's beautiful, but brutal. Rewarding, but relentless. You have to choose it every day, especially on the days when it's hardest. Clara thought about this, about choices and consequences, about the path that had led her here, barefoot and desperate to this man's doorstep. "I've never had many choices," she said softly, "but I'm grateful for this one." As the days passed, Clara began to add small touches to the cabin, wildflowers in a jar on the table, a quilt she'd mended draped over the foot of the bed, stones and interesting pieces of wood arranged on the windowsill. Small claims of temporary belonging. The baby blanket, however, remained carefully folded on the pillow each night, the one thing she couldn't bring herself to put away. One morning, while Clara was helping Jackson repair the barn roof, a truck pulled up the long driveway, dust billowing behind it. Clara instantly froze, her body tensing like a bowstring. Jackson noticed immediately. "You recognize that vehicle?" She shook her head, but her knuckles were white around the hammer she held. "No, but—" "Go to the cabin," Jackson said calmly. "Take Barley. I'll handle this." Clara hesitated only briefly before climbing down the ladder and slipping away, the goat trotting after her without being called. Jackson watched as she disappeared into the cabin, then turned his attention to the approaching truck. It was Sheriff Miller's vehicle, not unusual in itself. Frank Miller had been a friend of his father's and stopped by occasionally to check on things. "Morning, Frank," Jackson called as the older man stepped out of the truck. "Jackson," the sheriff nodded, pushing back his hat. "How's things?" "Can't complain," Jackson replied, descending the ladder. "What brings you out this way?" Frank's weathered face turned serious. "Got a notice from over in Idaho. They're looking for a woman. Dark hair, late 20s, might be traveling with a child." He pulled out a piece of paper. "Name's Clara Reeves. Her ex-husband reported her missing, along with her son. Says she's unstable, might be dangerous." Jackson kept his expression neutral, even as his mind raced. "What's she supposed to have done?" "Husband claims she took the boy and ran during a custody dispute. Says she's got mental problems, delusions." Frank studied Jackson's face. "You seen anyone fitting that description around these parts?" Jackson took the paper, studying the grainy photo. It was Clara, no doubt about that, though her hair was shorter in the picture, her face fuller. She was smiling, holding a small boy with the same dark curls. "Can't say I have," Jackson said, handing the paper back. "But I'll keep an eye out." Frank nodded slowly. "This husband, man named Reeves, he's offering a reward. Pretty substantial one. Must want her back badly. Says he's worried about the boy," Frank said. "Claims she's not fit to care for him." Jackson crossed his arms. "If I see anything, you'll be my first call." After the sheriff left, Jackson stood in the yard for a long time, dust settling around him. Then he walked slowly to the cabin and knocked gently on the door. "It's me," he called. Clara opened it cautiously, her face pale, Barley pressed against her legs protectively. "Sheriff's looking for you," Jackson said without preamble. "And your son." Clara's hand went to her throat, clutching the chain that disappeared beneath her shirt. "Did you tell him?" "I told him I hadn't seen anyone matching your description," Jackson interrupted. "But Clara, I need to know. Where is your son?" Tears filled her eyes then, spilling over before she could stop them. Slowly, she pulled the chain from beneath her shirt. Hanging from it was a small silver locket. She opened it with trembling fingers to reveal a tiny photo of the same dark-haired boy from the sheriff's notice. "He's gone," she whispered. "My beautiful boy is gone." Jackson's heart sank. What happened? Clara sank down onto the bed, the fight suddenly leaving her body. "Michael, my ex-husband. He was controlling, possessive. I didn't see it at first. By the time I did, I was already pregnant with Eli." She touched the locket. "After Eli was born, Michael got worse. Nothing I did was right. He monitored everything. who I talked to, what I spent, where I went. She took a shuddering breath. When I finally tried to leave, he threatened to take Eli from me. Said no judge would give a child to a woman with no job, no money, no family support. He was right. He had everything, and I had nothing. Jackson sat beside her, careful to keep space between them. What happened to Eli? Clara's face crumpled. Pneumonia. It happened so fast. One day he was fine. Just a little cough. The next. Her fingers clutched the baby blanket. Michael was away on business. I called and called, but he wouldn't answer. By the time he got back, it was too late. Eli was gone. Her voice broke. He blamed me. Said if I'd been a better mother, if I'd recognized the symptoms sooner. That's not fair, Jackson said, a quiet anger in his voice. After the funeral, he became obsessed with the idea that I'd done something to hurt Eli. That his death was my fault. He started telling everyone I was unstable, dangerous. Clara looked up, her eyes fierce despite the tears. I put up with his abuse for years, but I wouldn't let him destroy Eli's memory like that. So I took what I could carry and I ran. With just the blanket, Jackson said softly. She nodded. And Eli's locket, it's all I have left of him. And the goat? Despite everything, Clara gave a small, wet laugh. Barley was a miracle. I was hiding in an old barn outside of Clearwater, half-starved and ready to give up. He just wandered in, lay down beside me, and refused to leave, like he knew I needed something to care for. Jackson was quiet for a long moment, processing everything she'd told him. Then he stood. "Pack your things," he said. Clara looked up, stricken. "You're making us leave?" "No," Jackson said firmly. "I'm moving you into the main house. If anyone else comes looking, it'll be easier to protect you if you're close." "Protect me?" Clara repeated, disbelieving. "You believe me? Just like that?" Jackson met her gaze steadily. "I've seen enough of life to know that the truth is usually in the eyes, not the words. Your ex-husband is looking for someone to blame for a tragedy no one could control, and I won't let him find you here." That night, Clara slept in Jackson's guest room, Barley curled at the foot of the bed by special dispensation. For the first time since she'd fled Idaho, she slept deeply, without startling at every sound. Down the hall, Jackson lay awake, thinking about the woman and the goat who had stumbled into his life just days ago. About the son she had lost, and the husband who wanted to punish her for it. About second chances, and chosen families, and the strange, unexpected ways life could change course in an instant. Outside, the Montana night wrapped around Whispering Pines Ranch like a protective blanket, stars watching over its sleeping inhabitants, a lonely rancher, a grieving mother, and a one-horned goat who had somehow brought them together. The next morning, Clara woke to the smell of coffee and bacon. For a moment, disoriented in the unfamiliar room, panic seized her chest. Then she heard Barley's soft bleating from the foot of the bed, and reality settled back into place. She was at Whispering Pines Ranch. She was safe, at least for now. She dressed quickly in the clothes Jackson had lent her, a flannel shirt that hung to her knees and jeans she'd rolled up multiple times at the ankles. Through the window she could see the mountains in the distance, purple shadows giving way to golden light as the sun rose. It was beautiful in a way that made her chest ache, with something like hope. In the kitchen, Jackson stood at the stove, his back to her as he flipped pancakes in a cast-iron skillet. Without turning, he said, "Coffee's fresh. Mug's in the cabinet to your left." Clara smiled despite herself. "You have good ears." "You have light footsteps," he countered, glancing over his shoulder. "But the goat's hooves give you away." Barley, who had followed Clara into the kitchen, bleated indignantly. "Sorry, Barley," Jackson amended. "Didn't mean to offend." Clara poured herself coffee, adding a splash of cream from a small pitcher on the counter. It felt strangely domestic, this morning routine in a house that wasn't hers, with a man she'd known less than 2 weeks. "I've been thinking," Jackson said as he slid pancakes onto 2 plates. "If your ex-husband is serious about finding you, he won't stop with just the sheriff." Clara's stomach tightened. "No, he won't. So we need a plan." Jackson set the plates on the table and sat down across from her. "First, we need to establish you here. Make it look like you've been working for me for months, not days." "How?" "I'll backdate employment paperwork. Frank doesn't need to know when you actually arrived." Jackson cut into his pancakes. "Second, we need to create a different identity for you. Not on paper, just in people's minds. A story they'll remember and repeat if anyone comes asking." Clara sipped her coffee, considering this. "What kind of story?" "You're my late sister's friend from Denver. After she passed, you needed a fresh start, so you came here to help with the ranch." Jackson's eyes met hers. Simple, believable, and explains why no one's seen you before. "Your sister? She really passed away?" A shadow crossed Jackson's face. 3 years ago. Cancer. She was only 34. "I'm sorry," Clara said softly. He nodded once, acknowledging her sympathy without dwelling on it. "It works in our favor now. Not many people around here knew her well enough to question the connection." Clara set down her mug. "Jackson, why are you doing all this? You barely know me." He was quiet for a moment, thoughtful. "My father used to say there are 2 types of people in this world. Those who turn away from others' pain because it's not their business, and those who can't help but make it their business." He shrugged slightly. "I guess I'm the second type." "Even when it puts you at risk?" "Especially then," he said simply. "Now eat your pancakes before they get cold." After breakfast, they worked side by side repairing the leak in the barn roof. Clara had proven herself adept with tools, her hands growing stronger and more capable each day. Barley wandered below them, occasionally looking up as if to check their progress. "We should go into town tomorrow," Jackson said as he hammered a shingle into place. "People need to see you, get used to your face. Makes the story more believable." Clara paused, anxiety flickering across her features. "What if someone recognizes me from the notice? Sweetgrass is a small town. Everyone knows everyone. A stranger would stand out more than you showing up as my employee." He glanced at her. "But if you're not ready, we can wait." She straightened her shoulders. "No, you're right. Hiding only makes me look guilty of something." Jackson nodded, a hint of approval in his eyes. "We'll go after lunch. Need to pick up supplies anyway." That afternoon, Clara stood in front of the small mirror in the guest bathroom, staring at her reflection. Her dark curls had grown longer since she'd fled Idaho, now falling past her shoulders. Her face, once drawn with fear and exhaustion, had filled out slightly from regular meals and hard, honest work. She touched the locket around her neck, then carefully tucked it beneath her shirt. Eli was always with her, close to her heart, but his image was private, something sacred that Michael couldn't taint with his accusations. The drive into Sweetgrass took nearly 40 minutes, along winding dirt roads that eventually gave way to pavement. Clara sat tensely in the passenger seat of Jackson's old truck, Barley secured in the truck bed, where he seemed to enjoy the wind in his fur. "Relax," Jackson said, noticing her white-knuckled grip on the door handle. "Small towns run on gossip, but they also mind their own business in the ways that matter." "That's a contradiction," Clara pointed out. He chuckled. "Welcome to Montana." Sweetgrass was indeed small, one main street with a handful of businesses, a church with a white steeple, and houses scattered like afterthoughts around the perimeter. Jackson parked in front of the general store, a 2-story building with faded red brick and a hand-painted sign. "Ready?" he asked. Clara took a deep breath and nodded. As I'll ever be. Inside, the store was a maze of practical necessities, tools, canned goods, clothing, and household items crowded onto shelves that reached the ceiling. An older woman with silver hair pulled into a tight bun stood behind the counter, glasses perched on the end of her nose. "Jackson Hayes," she called, her voice carrying easily through the store. "Twice in 1 month. Must be some kind of record." "Afternoon, Mrs. Patterson," Jackson replied, tipping his hat. "Need some supplies." The woman's sharp eyes moved to Clara, curiosity evident. "And who might this be?" Jackson placed a hand lightly on Clara's back, a gesture of support that felt surprisingly natural. "This is Clara. She's helping me out at the ranch. Friend of my sister's from Denver." Mrs. Patterson's gaze softened slightly at the mention of Jackson's sister. "Well, any friend of Rebecca's is welcome here. Though I must say, ranch work is a far cry from city living." Clara managed to smile. "It's a learning curve, but I'm enjoying the change of pace." "And who's minding your goat?" Mrs. Patterson asked, peering out the window at Barley, who was contentedly watching the world from the truck bed. "That's Barley," Clara said. "He goes where I go." "A woman with a goat?" Mrs. Patterson mused. "Now I've seen everything." As they gathered supplies, nails, fence wire, flour, coffee, and a few items of clothing that might actually fit Clara, several other customers entered the store. Each time, Jackson introduced Clara with the same story, his tone casual and matter-of-fact, as if her presence in his life was the most natural thing in the world. By the time they left, loaded down with bags, Clara felt a strange mix of anxiety and relief. The story had been accepted without question, but each new person who saw her face was another potential witness if Michael ever came looking. Their last stop was the local diner, a small establishment with checkered tablecloths and the scent of fresh pie wafting through the air. Jackson insisted they eat before heading back to the ranch. "Best meatloaf in 3 counties," he said as they slid into a booth by the window where they could keep an eye on Barley. "And Ellen makes blackberry pie that might change your life." Clara smiled, some of the tension easing from her shoulders. High praise. A waitress approached, her eyes lighting up at the sight of Jackson. "Well, look what the wind blew in." Her gaze shifted to Clara, curiosity sparking. "And with company, no less." "Ellen, this is Clara," Jackson said. "She's working at the ranch." "Clara, this is Ellen, owner, chef, and keeper of all Sweetgrass secrets." Ellen, a woman in her 50s with laugh lines around her eyes and flour on her apron, extended a hand to Clara. "Any friend of Jackson's is a friend of mine. Though, I must say, he's never brought a lady friend in here before." Clara felt heat rise to her cheeks. "Oh, we're not." "She works for me," Jackson interrupted smoothly. "Friend of Rebecca's from Denver." Something flickered in Ellen's eyes. Understanding, perhaps, or simple kindness. "Well, you picked a good boss. This one pays his bills on time and doesn't complain about the coffee, unlike some I could mention." She winked. "Now, what can I get you two?" After they ordered, Clara leaned forward slightly. "Everyone seems to know you well." Jackson shrugged. "Small town. 3 generations of Hayes men have been coming to this diner since it opened in 1952. And none of them ever brought "lady friends?" she asked, a teasing note entering her voice for the first time. A hint of color touched Jackson's cheeks. "My father brought my mother here on their first date. According to local legend, he was so nervous he knocked over a whole pitcher of water into her lap." Clara laughed, the sound surprising them both. "And did she forgive him?" "Eventually. They were married for 42 years, so I guess the wet dress wasn't a deal-breaker." Their food arrived, interrupting the conversation. Clara realized she was genuinely hungry, the nervous energy of the day translating into a hearty appetite. The meatloaf was indeed excellent, savory and comforting in a way that reminded her of holidays before everything went wrong. As they ate, various townspeople stopped by their table to greet Jackson and meet Clara. Each time, he repeated the same story with unwavering consistency, and each time, it was accepted without question. By the time they finished their pie, which was, as promised, life-changing, Clara felt as if she'd passed some sort of test. On the drive back to the ranch, with the setting sun painting the mountains in shades of pink and gold, Clara finally relaxed fully, one hand resting on the open window. "Thank you," she said quietly. "For today." Jackson kept his eyes on the road. "People saw you. They'll remember you. If anyone comes looking for a frightened woman on the run, they won't connect it to my confident ranch hand with the one-horned goat." Clara smiled at that description, so different from how she saw herself. "Is that how I seemed? Confident?" "You were brave," he corrected. "Not the same thing, but maybe better." Back at the ranch, as they unloaded supplies, Barley trotting happily around them, Clara felt something she hadn't experienced in years, a sense of belonging, of having a place in the world that felt right. That night, after a simple dinner, they sat on the porch steps watching fireflies dance above the tall grass. The air was warm, fragrant with pine and wildflowers. Clara's fingers absently stroked Barley's crooked horn as the goat dozed beside her. "Jackson," she said after a comfortable silence, "what happened with your fiancée? Sarah, did it change how you see yourself?" He was quiet for so long she thought he might not answer. Then, "It made me question whether this life I've chosen is selfish, whether wanting solitude and simplicity means there's something wrong with me." "And what did you decide?" He looked out at the darkening land, his land passed down through generations. "That there's nothing wrong with choosing a life that makes sense to you, even if it doesn't make sense to anyone else." He glanced at her. "Why do you ask?" Clara watched a firefly land briefly on her knee before taking flight again. "Michael always said I was broken, that no one else would ever want me, that I was lucky he put up with me." She took a shaky breath. "After Eli died, and he blamed me, part of me started to believe him." Jackson's jaw tightened. "People who try to convince you you're broken usually just want to keep you from realizing your strength." "I wasn't strong," she whispered. "I stayed far too long." "You left eventually," he pointed out, "with nothing but a blanket and memories. Took a lot of courage to walk away from everything familiar, even if it was destroying you." Clara looked down at Barley, peacefully asleep against her leg. "And then this ridiculous goat found me and decided I was worth following." "Smart goat," Jackson said simply. The next morning, Clara woke before dawn. Something had disturbed her sleep. Not a nightmare, but a feeling, an uneasiness that lingered even as she opened her eyes to the familiar guest room. She slipped out of bed, careful not to wake Barley, and padded to the window. The ranch was quiet, peaceful in the pre-dawn light. Nothing seemed amiss, yet the feeling persisted, a tightness in her chest, a prickling at the back of her neck. Clara dressed quickly and made her way downstairs. The kitchen was empty, Jackson's coffee mug still in the dish rack from the night before. She started the coffee brewing, finding comfort in the routine task, and stepped onto the porch to watch the sunrise. That's when she saw it, a vehicle she didn't recognize parked at the end of the long driveway, half hidden by trees. Her blood turned to ice. Clara backed into the house, heart hammering against her ribs. It could be nothing. A lost driver, a ranch hand coming early, a neighbor. But the feeling in her gut told her otherwise. She was climbing the stairs to wake Jackson when she heard his bedroom door open. He appeared at the top of the landing, already dressed, his expression concerned. "There's a car," she said, voice barely above a whisper. "At the end of the drive." Jackson nodded once. "I saw it. Stay inside. I'll check it out." "Jackson, it's probably nothing," he said. But the way he moved toward the gun cabinet in the living room told a different story. Clara watched from the window as Jackson walked down the driveway, shotgun held casually but ready at his side. The distance was too great for her to see clearly what happened, but after several minutes, the vehicle started up and drove away, dust billowing behind it. When Jackson returned, his face was grim. "Who was it?" Clara asked, Barley now pressing against her legs, as if sensing her fear. "Private investigator from Boise," Jackson said, placing the shotgun back in the cabinet. "Looking for a woman who matches your description." Clara sank into a chair, legs suddenly unable to support her. Did he know I'm here?" "Said he was checking all ranches and farms in a 100-mile radius. I told him I hadn't seen anyone like that." Jackson sat down across from her. "But he'll be back. Or someone else will." "I should leave," Clara said, the words painful but necessary. "I'm putting you in danger." Jackson's expression hardened. "You're not going anywhere." "Jackson." "Not alone, anyway." He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "I've been thinking about this since the sheriff came by. We need to be proactive, not just reactive. We need to fight back." Clara stared at him. "How?" "By proving your ex-husband is lying about you being unstable or dangerous." Jackson's eyes were intense, determined. "By getting statements from the doctors who treated Eli, medical records that show he died of natural causes, character references from people who knew you before." "Michael has money," Clara said softly. "Influence. People are scared to cross him." "I'm not," Jackson stated simply. "And neither are you, not anymore." Clara looked down at her hands, stronger now from days of ranch work, no longer the hands of a frightened woman on the run. "What exactly are you suggesting?" "I have a friend," Jackson said, "a lawyer in Missoula, specialized in family law. She can help us build a case, not just to defend you, but to expose him for what he really is." "Why would you do this?" Clara asked, a question she'd asked in various ways since arriving at his door. "Take on someone else's fight?" Jackson was quiet for a moment, choosing his words carefully. "When my sister was sick, she fought alone for too long. By the time I realized how bad things were, it was almost too late to help her." He met Clara's gaze. "I promised myself I'd never again stand by while someone fought a battle they shouldn't have to face alone." Clara felt tears prick her eyes. "I'm scared, Jackson." "He's powerful." "So are you," he countered. "You just forgot for a while." Barley chose that moment to headbutt Clara's leg gently, as if in agreement. Despite everything, she smiled. "The goat has spoken," Jackson said with a small smile of his own. "And according to our deal, if he chooses this life, so do you." Clara reached down to stroke Barley's bent horn. "Do goats get a vote in legal strategies too?" "Only the smart ones with crooked horns." Over the next few days, Clara and Jackson developed a plan. They would continue establishing her presence in Sweetgrass, building relationships with townspeople who could later vouch for her character. Meanwhile, Jackson would contact his lawyer friend in Missoula to begin gathering evidence against Michael. The work of the ranch continued. Fences needed mending, animals needed tending, the garden required daily attention. Clara threw herself into these tasks with renewed vigor, as if each repaired board and harvested vegetable was an act of defiance against the man who had tried to destroy her. One evening, as they sat at the kitchen table reviewing notes Jackson had made about potential witnesses, Clara found herself studying his face. The concentration in his eyes, the determined set of his jaw, the way his hand moved steadily across the paper as he wrote. This man, who had been a stranger less than a month ago, was now risking everything to help her. "What?" Jackson asked, catching her gaze. Clara shook her head slightly. Just thinking about how strange life is. A month ago, I was sleeping in abandoned barns, afraid of my own shadow. Now I'm sitting in a kitchen with a cowboy and a goat, planning to fight back. Life has a way of surprising us, Jackson agreed. Not always in good ways, but sometimes. He trailed off, his eyes holding hers for a moment longer than necessary. Clara felt something shift between them, a current of understanding that went beyond words. Before either could acknowledge it, Barley, who had been dozing near the wood stove, suddenly lifted his head, ears perked forward. A moment later, they heard it too, the sound of tires on gravel, a vehicle approaching the house. Jackson was on his feet in an instant, moving to the window with the fluid grace of a man accustomed to responding to unexpected situations. Clara stood too, her heart hammering against her ribs as Barley pressed protectively against her legs. "It's Frank," Jackson said, relief evident in his voice. "The sheriff." Clara's shoulders remained tense. "Is that good news or bad?" "Won't know till we find out." Jackson turned to her, his expression serious but calm. "Stay here. Let me talk to him first." Clara nodded, one hand dropping to Barley's head for comfort, as Jackson stepped onto the porch to greet the sheriff. Through the window, she watched their interaction, Jackson's stance casual but alert, Frank's movements deliberate as he removed his hat. After what felt like an eternity, Jackson beckoned her outside. Clara hesitated, then squared her shoulders and stepped onto the porch, Barley trotting faithfully beside her. "Evening, miss," Sheriff Miller said, his weathered face giving away nothing of his thoughts. "I believe we need to have a conversation." "Frank knows who you are," Jackson said quietly. "No point in pretending otherwise." Clara's throat went dry, but she managed to nod. "I understand." The sheriff's eyes moved to Barley, then back to Clara. Interesting choice of companion. Despite everything, Clara felt a flicker of defiance. "He chose me, actually." A hint of something, perhaps respect, flashed in the sheriff's eyes. "Let's talk inside. This isn't a conversation for open air." Around the kitchen table, with mugs of strong coffee before them, Frank Miller laid out the situation without preamble. "Your ex-husband hired a private investigator who's been asking questions all over the county. Got a photograph of you leaving the general store 2 days ago." He slid a grainy image across the table, Clara helping Jackson load supplies into his truck, Barley visible in the background. "He'll be back, with reinforcements." Clara's fingers tightened around her mug. "What kind of reinforcements?" "Legal ones," Frank said. "He's filing for an emergency hearing, claiming you're mentally unstable and a danger to yourself." "That's a lie," Jackson said, his voice hard. Frank held up a hand. "I'm just telling you what's coming. I've known the Hayes family my whole life. If Jackson vouches for you, that means something to me. But officially, I have to follow the law." "And what does the law say about a man who emotionally abuses his wife, then tries to destroy her after the death of their child?" Clara asked, surprising herself with the steadiness of her voice. Frank studied her for a long moment. "The law isn't always as just as we'd like it to be, but it's what we have to work with." "So what now?" Jackson asked. "She just waits to be ambushed by legal papers or dragged back to Idaho?" "No," Frank said firmly. "Now you get ahead of this. There's a judge in Missoula, Margaret Holloway. Known her since law school. She doesn't
tolerate bullies or abuse of the legal system. He pulled a card from his pocket and slid it across the table. "Call her office first thing tomorrow. Tell her Frank Miller sent you." Clara stared at the card, then at the sheriff. "Why are you helping me?" Frank's expression softened slightly. "I've been sheriff in this county for 28 years. Seen my share of women running from bad men. The innocent ones have a certain look in their eyes. Not just fear, but a kind of determined dignity." He nodded toward Barley. "And in my experience, animals are excellent judges of character. That goat wouldn't stick by you if you were what your ex-husband claims." After the sheriff left, with a promise to call if he heard anything more, Clara and Jackson sat in stunned silence. Barley, sensing the tension, moved between them, gently headbutting each of their legs in turn as if trying to comfort them both. "Well," Jackson said finally, Seems like the goat's character reference carries some weight around here. Clara let out a choked laugh that was close to a sob. I can't believe he's helping us. Frank's a good man. Always has been. Jackson reached across the table and, after a moment's hesitation, covered her hand with his. This is good, Clara. It means we're not alone in this fight. She looked down at their hands, his tanned and calloused from years of ranch work, hers now showing similar signs of honest labor. I've been alone for so long, she whispered. I don't know how to trust this. You don't have to trust it all at once, Jackson said simply. Just take it one day at a time. Today, we found an ally. Tomorrow, we'll call the judge. That night, Clara couldn't sleep. She sat by the window in the guest room, watching the stars wheel overhead while Barley dozed at her feet. Her mind raced with possibilities, both hopeful and terrifying. What if the judge believed Michael's lies? What if she was forced to return to Idaho, to face not just legal consequences but the crushing weight of his presence in her life again? Or what if, by some miracle, she was able to clear her name, to build a new life here in Montana with the goat who had saved her and the man who had offered shelter without demands? A soft knock at the door pulled her from these thoughts. Clara? Jackson's voice, low and concerned. You awake? She opened the door to find him standing there in a t-shirt and flannel pants, his hair slightly mussed. Couldn't sleep either, he said, offering a sheepish smile. Clara stepped back, inviting him in without words. They sat together on the window seat, shoulders nearly touching, looking out at the Montana night. When my sister was diagnosed, Jackson said after a comfortable silence, she told me something I'll never forget. She said, the worst thing about fear is how it lies to you. Tells you you're alone when you're not. Tells you you're weak when you're strong. Tells you there's no way out when there are doors everywhere. Clara felt tears prick her eyes. She sounds like she was very wise. She was. Jackson's voice held a gentle sadness. And she'd like you, I think. You have the same kind of courage. Not the flashy kind, but the quiet, enduring kind that gets up every morning and faces whatever comes. I don't feel very courageous, Clara admitted. Most days I feel like I'm just trying not to drown. That's exactly what courage is, Jackson said. Not the absence of fear, but the willingness to keep swimming anyway. Clara looked at him then, really looked at him. This man who had opened his home and his heart to her, who was now risking his peaceful existence to help her fight a battle that wasn't his. In the moonlight streaming through the window, his face was half in shadow, but his eyes were clear and steady, meeting hers without hesitation. Without thinking, she leaned forward and pressed her lips to his, a gesture of gratitude and something more, something new and fragile but growing stronger each day. For a heartbeat, Jackson remained still, surprised. Then his hand came up to cup her cheek, gentle as a summer breeze, as he returned the kiss with a tenderness that made her heart ache. When they pulled apart, neither spoke immediately. There was no need for words. The understanding between them transcended language, born of shared purpose and mutual respect that had deepened into something neither had expected. Barley chose that moment to wake up, stretching languidly before moving to nudge his head against their
joined hands, as if giving his approval. Jackson chuckled softly. The goat has spoken. Clara smiled, the weight of fear lifting slightly from her shoulders. He usually knows best. The next morning, they called Judge Holloway's office, as Sheriff Miller had suggested. The judge's clerk listened to their situation with professional detachment, then scheduled a meeting for the following day in Missoula, a 2-hour drive from Whispering Pines. That was fast, Clara said as Jackson hung up the phone. Frank's recommendation must carry weight, he replied. Or maybe the judge is as tired of bullies as we are. They spent the day preparing, gathering what little documentation Clara had managed to take when she fled Idaho, writing down a timeline of events, and making notes about potential witnesses who might corroborate her account of Michael's controlling behavior. By evening, Clara was exhausted but oddly energized. For the first time since Eli's death, she was taking action rather than simply reacting, fighting back rather than running away. After dinner, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of pink and gold, Clara realized something had shifted within her. The constant knot of fear in her stomach had loosened, replaced by a quiet determination. "Whatever happens tomorrow," she said, "I want you to know how grateful I am, not just for the shelter and protection, but for helping me remember who I am." Jackson turned to her, his expression serious. "And who is that?" Clara thought for a moment, her hand automatically finding Barley's crooked horn as the goat leaned against her legs. "Someone who deserves better than what I accepted for too long. Someone who can build something new." She met Jackson's gaze. "Someone who can love again, maybe." The last words were barely above a whisper, but in the quiet evening air, they carried clearly. Jackson's eyes softened, and he reached for her hand, entwining their fingers with deliberate care. "I'd like to see you build that new life," he said. "And I'd like to be part of it, if you'll have me." Barley gave a soft bleat, as if adding his approval to the conversation. Clara laughed softly. "I think we're a package deal now, me and the goat." "Wouldn't have it any other way," Jackson replied, his smile reaching all the way to his eyes. The drive to Missoula the next morning was tense, but hopeful. Clara sat in the passenger seat of Jackson's truck, Barley secured in a makeshift harness in the back seat. They had agreed that the goat's presence might seem odd to some, but he was a crucial part of her story and her healing. Judge Margaret Holloway's chambers were located in a stately brick courthouse in downtown Missoula. The judge herself was a formidable woman in her 60s, with silver hair cut in a practical bob and piercing blue eyes that seemed to look straight through pretense. "Sheriff Miller speaks highly of you, Mr. Hayes," she said after introductions were made. Her gaze shifted to Clara. "And he seems to believe your situation warrants special attention, Ms. Reeves." "Thank you for seeing us, Your Honor," Clara said, her voice steadier than she felt. Judge Holloway nodded toward Barley, who was sitting politely beside Clara's chair. "I've had many visitors in my chambers over the years, but never a goat. He must be special." "He is," Clara said simply. "He found me when I needed him most." Something in the judge's expression softened slightly. "Sometimes the universe sends us exactly what we need, even if it comes in unexpected packages." She straightened in her chair. "Now, tell me everything. From the beginning." For the next hour, Clara spoke more freely than she had in years. She told the judge about meeting Michael Reeves, his charm and confidence that had initially attracted her, the gradual isolation from friends and family, the criticism that chipped away at her self-worth. She described Eli's birth and the joy he had brought, followed by Michael's increasing control and emotional manipulation. When she reached the part about Eli's illness and death, her voice faltered. Jackson, sitting beside her, placed his hand over hers in silent support. Barley pressed closer to her legs, his animal intuition sensing her distress. "He was gone so quickly," Clara said, tears tracking silently down her cheeks. "The doctor said it was a particularly aggressive form of pneumonia. By the time I got him to the hospital, the infection had spread too far." "And your husband was where?" Judge Holloway asked, her tone neutral but her eyes sharp. "At a business conference in Seattle. I called him repeatedly, left messages. He didn't answer until the next day, and by then—" Clara took a shuddering breath. "By then, it was too late." "And afterward, he blamed you for your son's death?" Clara nodded. "He said if I'd been a better mother, more attentive, I would have recognized the symptoms sooner. He told everyone I was unstable, that I'd neglected Eli." Her voice strengthened. "But I loved my son more than anything in this world. I would have given my life for his in a heartbeat." Judge Holloway was quiet for a long moment, her fingers steepled beneath her chin. "I believe you, Ms. Reeves. The question now is how to protect you legally from a man who seems determined to punish you for a tragedy no one could have prevented." "He won't stop," Clara said. "Michael doesn't lose. Not in business, not in personal matters. It's a point of pride with him." "Everyone loses eventually," Judge Holloway said, a hint of steel in her voice. "Especially those who abuse the legal system to continue patterns of control and intimidation." She turned to her computer and typed rapidly for a few moments. "I'm issuing a temporary restraining order, preventing Mr. Reeves from approaching within 500 feet of you or Mr. Hayes's property. Additionally, I'm contacting a colleague in Idaho to review the allegations of mental instability your ex-husband has filed. Clara felt a weight lift from her shoulders. Thank you, Your Honor. Don't thank me yet, the judge cautioned. This is just the beginning. Mr. Reeves has resources and, I suspect, a willingness to use them. We need to build a stronger case. She looked at Jackson. The sheriff mentioned you have a friend who's a lawyer? Jackson nodded. Catherine Winters. Specializes in family law. Good. I know Catherine. She's thorough and relentless. Exactly what you need right now. Judge Holloway handed them a business card. Have her contact my office directly. We'll coordinate strategy. As they prepared to leave, the judge addressed Clara once more. Ms. Reeves, I've seen many women in situations similar to yours. The ones who succeed in breaking free are those who reclaim their own narrative, who refuse to accept the story others have written for them. Her gaze moved to Barley, then back to Clara. You've already taken the first steps. Keep walking your own path. Outside the courthouse, Clara stood for a moment in the bright Montana sunshine, letting the judge's words sink in. Reclaim her own narrative. Write her own story. For so long, she had been defined by Michael's perception of her, weak, inadequate, to blame. But here, with Jackson and Barley beside her, she was beginning to see herself through new eyes. You did great in there, Jackson said, his hand finding the small of her back in that now familiar gesture of support. Clara looked up at him, a smile breaking through the emotional exhaustion. We did great. I couldn't have done this alone. You're not alone anymore, he reminded her. Not ever again, if I have anything to say about it. Barley bleated in agreement, headbutting Clara's leg gently. See? Jackson grinned. Even the goat thinks you're stuck with us now. They stopped for lunch at a small cafe before heading back to Whispering Pines. The waitress raised an eyebrow at Barley, but, after Jackson explained he was a therapy animal, allowed him to stay as long as he remained well-behaved. He's better mannered than most people I know, Clara said, watching as Barley settled calmly beside their table, drawing curious but admiring glances from other patrons. You've done a good job with him, Jackson observed. He trusts you completely. Clara considered this as she sipped her tea. I think we healed each other. When I found him, or when he found me, we were both lost in different ways, both damaged by people who should have cared for us. Jackson's expression grew thoughtful. That's how it works sometimes. The broken places in us recognize each other, fit together in ways that make us both stronger. Is that what happened with us? Clara asked softly. Jackson reached across the table, taking her hand in his. I think so. I wasn't looking for anyone to come into my life. After Sarah left, after Rebecca died, I figured I was meant to be alone. He smiled slightly. Then you showed up barefoot with a goat and a baby blanket, and suddenly my quiet ranch didn't seem so empty anymore. Clara felt warmth spread through her chest, a sensation so unfamiliar it took her a moment to recognize it as happiness, pure and uncomplicated. On the drive back to Whispering Pines, with Barley dozing contentedly in the back seat, Clara watched the Montana landscape roll past her window. Mountains in the distance, fields of wildflowers, open sky that seemed to go on forever. This place that had started as just another stop in her desperate flight had become something else, a sanctuary, a possibility, a home. Jackson drove with one hand on the wheel, the other resting on the seat between them. Without hesitation, Clara placed her hand over his, their fingers interlacing naturally, as if they'd been doing this for years instead of days. "What are you thinking?" he asked, glancing at her briefly before returning his attention to the road. Clara considered the question. "I'm thinking about what the judge said, about reclaiming my own narrative. For so long, I've been running from Michael's version of who I am. Maybe it's time to start running toward my own version instead." Jackson squeezed her hand. "And what version is that?" She smiled, looking ahead at the road stretching before them. "Someone who is strong enough to start over. Someone who is worthy of kindness and love. Someone who can build a life that honors Eli's memory without being trapped by grief." "I like that version," Jackson said softly. "She sounds like someone I'd like to know better." "You already do," Clara replied. "You saw her before I could." As they turned onto the long driveway leading to Whispering Pines Ranch, Clara felt a sense of rightness settle over her. This wasn't the end of her struggle. Michael would fight back, possibly harder than before, but for the first time since Eli's death, she wasn't facing the battle alone. She had Jackson, steady and unwavering in his support. She had Barley, with his crooked horn and unwavering loyalty. And most importantly, she had herself, stronger than she'd realized, more resilient than she'd believed possible. The ranch came into view, bathed in the golden light of late afternoon. Home, Clara thought. Not the one she'd planned or expected, but perhaps the one she'd needed all along. A place where a barefoot woman with a goat and a baby blanket could find not just shelter, but the courage to build something new from the ashes of her past. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.